Stories that time forgot.
73 pages signed in the isolation of a mountain were enough to chain the global economy to the destiny of a single nation and sow the seeds of the crises that today threaten to collapse your own pocket. The Bretton Woods Agreement, the day the world changed. Imagine walking through the carpeted hallways of the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, while the echo of your footsteps mingles with the murmur of 730 delegates, who seem to hold the weight of the universe upon their shoulders. It is July 1, 1944. Outside, the White Mountains air is crisp and pure, but inside the lobby, the atmosphere is heavy with thick tobacco smoke and an electric anxiety you could cut with a knife. You've arrived on a special train alongside representatives from 44 allied nations who have left behind burning cities and mud-covered battlefields in Europe and Asia. What you are witnessing is not a simple diplomatic meeting. It is the birth of a new world order. You stop to observe two men who personify the clash of two eras. On one side, you see John Maynard Keynes, the most brilliant British economist. Although he walks with elegance, his eyes reflect the exhaustion of an empire, the United Kingdom, which has bled itself dry financially to stop Nazism. On the other appears Harry Dexter White, the shrewd strategist of the United States Treasury Department. White represents the rising power, a nation that holds 70% of the planet's gold and whose factories are running at full capacity, while the rest of the world is a graveyard of ashes. If you pay attention to their conversations in the grand ballroom, you'll notice that Keynes has an almost poetic dream for you and for future generations. He proposes creating an international currency called Bancor. It would not belong to any country. It would be a balanced system where rich nations could not infinitely accumulate wealth at the expense of the poor. Keynes seeks equity. However, White has other plans. He knows that whoever controls the money controls history. With mathematical coldness, White rejects the Bancor and proposes that the US dollar be the axis upon which the earth rotates. The dollar would be as good as gold, convertible at $35 an ounce, and every other currency would have to kneel before it. As you walk through the committee rooms, you hear terms that are familiar to you today but were bold experiments in 1944. You hear talk of the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which you know today simply as the World Bank. But don't let the elegant names fool you. White is designing these institutions with surgical precision to ensure that the United States has the right of veto. Imagine the tension in Suite 308 of the hotel during the night of July 16. Keynes attempts one last desperate maneuver to limit the absolute power of the dollar, but White responds with a phrase that should give you goosebumps. The world needs an anchor, and we are that anchor. In that moment, Keynes realizes he hasn't come to negotiate an economic peace treaty, but to sign the terms of a financial surrender. The British Empire is dead, and the empire of the dollar has just claimed its throne. On July 22, you see the delegates sign the final act. There is French champagne and military music. But beneath the celebration hide the cracks that you suffer from today. The system included no rules for rich countries to help poor ones equitably. Countries in trouble would be forced to cut spending and suffer austerity, while the United States could print bills without rest. Keynes warned that they were building a house without drains and that, sooner or later, the basement would flood. For 25 years, it would seem to you that the system works perfectly. Trade grows, cities are rebuilt, and it seems that prosperity is eternal. But the noise of the typewriters in the U.S. Treasury offices hides a secret. There are more dollars circulating than gold stored in the vaults. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon decides to break the rules of the game they themselves invented. Without warning anyone, he closes the gold window. The dollar ceases to be backed by precious metal and is backed only by trust and military power. Since then, you live in an updated and more aggressive Bretton Woods world. The dollar is still king. But if you look around today, you'll see the landscape is changing. You hear talk of the countries forming the BRICS group. China signs deals to use its own currency, and in Europe, there is debate over a digital euro that does not depend on Washington. Feel for a moment the atmosphere of that hotel in New Hampshire, the smell of old wood, the sound of ceiling fans, and the feeling that your future was decided in a room where you were not invited. Those men were not movie villains. They were realists. But in doing so, they created a system where the privilege of a few is sustained by the effort of many. Today, when you go to the bank or see news about inflation and sovereign debt, you are living the direct consequences. The system that promised stability has generated an inequality that seems insurmountable. The legacy of Bretton Woods is an architecture of pure power. It is a beautiful house, but as Keynes said, its foundations are soaked and the walls have begun to give way. We are reaching the end of this journey into the heart of financial power. The world order, was built on supremacy, not justice. That decision made 8 decades ago defines the price of what you eat, the value of your work, and the stability of your nation. The clock of history keeps ticking, and the Bretton Woods system seems to be reaching its expiration date. Do you think today's world would be more stable if we had adopted the neutral currency, proposed by Keynes, instead of handing all control to the dollar? Please leave your answer in the comments. Your opinion is fundamental to understanding how we perceive the future of our economy. Hit like and subscribe to discover more stories time forgot.